Thank you guys for joining the meeting. I think this is our seventh in the series of webinars we have done regarding the CMMC um, certification. I know the federal government has declared today a holiday, but we are thankful that you guys have joined us. For most small businesses, I don't really think there are any holidays anyway. So again, we have four experts here that over the last six or seven webinars have really shared some important information regarding the CMMC process. And these individuals are extremely experienced and have tons of knowledge um, regarding this process. Again, my name is Philip Denny, president of USGovCert. We are a tools builder that make the USGov tools purpose is to help those who are seeking certification manage the documentation storm that you're going to face once you start the process of being certified. We'll put some information in the links for you as we go along. But the most important thing we want to do here today is to have our four experts um, talk to you about what they believe this program is heading. And some of you might already be aware that the CMMC certification requirement is already starting to show up in DoD solicitations. So so that we make the best use of our time, we have less than an hour. Um, Want to introduce our four panelists. First, I'm going to do kind of an overview and then turn it over to them for them to get into some more detailed information regarding their experience and where they see this program is heading. First, there's Robert Ascroft. Robert is president of CMMC Solutions, is a division of Corporate Visions LLC. Now, CMMC Solutions is dedicated to preparing the defense industrial base for its cybersecurity challenges. He has some key patterns to his name. His firm has experience IT audits with considerable cybersecurity knowledge. Um, they understand the complexities and inheritance requirements to pass an assessment. He is also currently an adjunct professor of information security at Kutztown University. Robert will tell you a little bit more about his experience and share a lot more knowledge with you in a little while. But next we have Stephen Palomera. Stephen, with over 25 years of experience in the tech industry and a degree in computer science, mathematics from Purdue University. Sorry. Steve is a seasoned professional. Over the past 5 years, he has become a leading authority in NIST 800-171 and CMMC compliance. He has collaborated with numerous organizations, helping them navigate the complex world of compliance and cybersecurity. Now, currently, uh, Steve is serving as channel partner manager for the CMMC Fast Track program at Lifeline Data Centers. Steve specializes in leveraging virtualization technology to streamline and enhance the CMMC compliance process. In this upcoming webinar, he will share valuable insight on how virtualization can revolutionize cybersecurity and compliance, offering a more secure digital future. Our next panelist is Chris Haig. Uh, Chris is the CEO of Mercat Cyber, a firm dedicated to cybersecurity and the Department of Defense Cyber Security Maturity Model Certification Framework. As a trained aeronautical and astronautical engineer who complemented his undergraduate work with a law degree, Chris finds the marriage of technology and regulatory policy fascinating. During his 3-decade career, Chris has held roles. Chris, I apologize for that. Well, a little under the weather. My kids came to visit for Christmas and they left me a gift. Uh, Chris has had roles including Senate policy analyst and chief technology officer of a cybersecurity firm. He has obtained the highest level of certification possible through the Department of Defense CMMC program, including a certified assessor, certified CMMC professional, and certified CMMC instructor. And he is currently among, I think the number at the time was 42 people in the world who can perform CMMC assessments. I know that number has changed. And Nick, I don't know if anyone knows what the exact number is now. Chris has also spent decades as a technical writer. Aside from authoring hundreds of patent applications for highly technical inventions, he is the named inventor on numerous patents and has served as a technical writer for Nobel laureates, international thought leaders, and numerous universities. Among his accomplishments, Chris has been engaged by Microsoft to write their CMMC implementation guide. Our final panelist is Kelly Kendall. Kelly is a service-disabled vet of the Marine Corps and the CEO and president of KNC Strategic Services. KNC is a cybersecurity service provider based in Carlsbad, California. They are they're an authorized, C3 PAO firm. Kelly is a certified assessor also. Has over 30 years of leadership experience, both in the military and the corporate world. Kelly brings a unique blend of discipline, strategic thinking, and execution to cybersecurity management. His understanding of how to lead teams effectively translates into well-managed, well-executed security programs for clients. And we've gotten the introductions out of the way, so I'm going to turn it over to our panelists so that they can actually introduce themselves and more importantly, tell you where they believe the CMMC program currently is at. Again, thank you very much. And you can see a poll popped up for most of us. Just a quick poll so that we can get a sense for where you are in terms of your certification journey. So take it over, Robert. You're on mute, Robert.
Just saw that, CMMC Solutions, and led a division of the top 3 prime to their certification, adjunct professor at Kutztown University, to where had actually 2 classes this fall on CMMC, where I use CMMC as the framework, but I do it from a business relationship so that they know and relate to a business how controls relate to applications and to the business, so that people here with your companies, if you see someone coming from Kutztown and they took that CMMC course, you know that they'll have a good foundation. Okay.
Thanks very much.
Yeah.
Kelly or Chris?
Sure. It'll depend on if I start coughing. If I cough, Chris, could you jump in? No, I'm fighting the same cold. I think your kids threw it out to me somehow across the country.
Yeah, it travels.
So, it does, very much so. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Kelly Kendall. I'm the CEO and president of KNC Strategic Services. As Philip mentioned, we're one of the very few right now authorized or reauthorized, as some of us are calling it, certified. CMMC, God, still change still messes with my brain. CMMC, third party assessment organization. And right now, as of 2 days ago, I haven't checked in the last 2 days, but 2 days ago, we were the only C3PO that's authorized in the entire Pacific time zone. That kind of freaks me out. It's a great thing in a way, but it's also crazy to be able to say that. But there are several others that should be going through the reauthorization process. But as of 2 days ago, we're the only one. So looking forward to chatting with everybody. Happy to be here.
Thanks
And
very
I will
much.
piggyback on what Kelly said and say, this is an exciting time, and I am so glad to see a big audience today because, hey, the stuff has hit the fan. CMMC is for real. I used to sit across from people who would tell me it's never going to happen. Major primes like L3 telling me, no, CMMC is never going to come to be. And here we are, it did. And our doors are getting pretty busy right now. So like Kelly said, being the only one in the Pacific time zone, wow, it's kind of scary when you think about how many people need to go through the assessment process and how few we have. If anybody's interested in learning more, I'm the instructor on the team who can help you guys out with that. And if that's a path that you want to internally train your people, reach out to me separately. But I'll tell you, we just had a webinar a month ago with the Apex Accelerator group, and over 100 people sat on the webinar for 4 hours. And I didn't even know, people would stick around for 4 hours, but that's how much they want to hear about CMMC. So glad you guys are here. We won't go for 4 hours today, but we hope that we can be as informative. And please reach out to any of us here if you have more questions.
Thanks very much, Greg.
Steve Polomar, I'm Vice President over at Lifeline Data Centers. And I think, Philip, you did a pretty good job of describing, what it is that I do and some of my background. We are working with a lot of companies. We're kind of like GCC High and GCC High Azure. Lifeline Data Centers has a DISA IL5 environment, DISA IL4 environment, twin environments, and we virtualize companies and have a CMMC fast track solution that gets companies rapidly to compliance. So we have several that are in the process of interviewing, and we're working with Chris and Bob Ashcraft on these clients, but we're working on getting them a C3PAO and getting them into the queue. So that's what we're here today is there's lots of questions that are wrapped around that. Kelly is living it now by queuing up these clients, and we're living it as well by interviewing C3PAOs, getting ready for the assessments now that you can get certified officially. So that's what we want to do is kind of provide some insights on what that process looks like and where that's going and how that's going at this point.
That's fantastic. So before we actually launch, is there any new information you guys can share about some latest information, the latest direction that your contacts and experience tells you that is happening in CMMC?
Well, I thought, Kelly, from our conversation yesterday, just given these guys some insight on from a C3PAO's perspective, what your expectations were and how that's actually going in terms of companies that are getting ready to be assessed and what process they're going through and when they are actually queuing up to get assessed was interesting.
Yeah, it surprised me. And so over the course of the last 2 months, it's been insane as far as the amount of proposals and price shopping that everyone's doing, which we completely understand. But as far as actual signed up assessments and scheduling, I thought there was going to be a lot of companies coming out the gate that wanted to be, if not in January, in February, March, right at the beginning, chomping at the bit to get this done. And I've been surprised that the vast majority of what we've scheduled so far has been between April and July. So the vast majority still want a little bit more time, even, excuse me, great timing. Even though they're ready to go, they're coming to us, they're signing contracts and paying up front and doing everything. but they still want a little bit more extra time, which in a way I can understand, but I was surprised by it. I was really expecting a lot more companies to be chomping at the bit, to be like, I want to be number one, be able to have that sales advantage and whatnot. But we're also scheduling a little bit differently than some of our competitors in that some are saying we're already booked for the entire year. We're treating it more like a general contractor, and we're fielding as many teams as we need to handle as much capacity as we can, because there is just so much to do. I mean, if I just to give you a simple statistic-ish, if I filled 2 full teams, which is 6 assessors, and I have them running full time, as many as they can do per month, and we do that for an entire year, we'll have only assessed 48 companies. It doesn't sound like very much when you think of there's 80,000 plus that will need to get certified. So yeah, our goal is to field as many teams as we can to try to help with the big demand.
So I guess the West Coast is going to be hurting a little bit.
You're going to be a little slow. Yeah.
Yeah, but you can cover anything. The only thing that you really worry about is the on-site is where the geographic, but that's just one shot, and typically you're out there one day and that's it.
Yeah, it's pretty much one day, and sampling is one thing that came out in the final version of the what drives us, which is called the CMMC assessment process, or the CAP as we call it. And we didn't know how many locations we'd have to visit, which is a very important point. And so now we have a sampling structure. It's not statistical. It's not saying you have to assess 10%, 20%. It gives us a lot of flexibility to determine. So that was a good recent development too.
Sure. You alluded to the fact, Kelly, of there not being the rush that you had initially expected for January to be the first out the blocks. Is it are the potential customers waiting for? What would you speculate the reason for the wait? Is it that they don't believe that this will that DoD is serious about ensuring that this gets done, or what would account for that delay?
My instinct from talking to them and doing consulting work on this for many years is that they're ready to get signed up, but they're not 100% sure they're assessment ready, like ready to actually pass the assessment.
Yep.
But they know that there's a time delay too because of the scheduling, and that they can control what month. And so, since companies are still picking 4, 5, 6 months from now, that they still have plenty of time to finish up anything that they need to, but they want to get in the queue and make sure that they're in there so that they don't get told, like some of the others are saying, I'm sorry, we're full, we can't assess anyone else.
So how do you to get over that initial hump? What tools or approaches would you recommend that they do to kind of do some internal work first, so that they can make sure that they are as ready as possible when they reach out to firms like yours or Robert's or Chris's? What do they need to do? What can they do in preparation for?
That's an interesting thing, because of a discussion we were having yesterday about this. But normally I would be saying, get prepared, get organized, get all your evidence together, get it properly organized, name it by the name of the control that it's going to apply to, normal tips like that. But what I would say now, more to the point of what you're saying, is we can actually conduct what's called a mock assessment. And we were talking about this when we were discussing this group yesterday. We're allowed to conduct a mock assessment for a company and still be their official assessor if we do it the right way, meaning we cannot, it's a brick wall. We cannot cross between being consulting and being an assessor, which is actually really hard to do when you're a consultant by nature. But we can do a mock assessment, which is essentially a dry run. It gives you the experience of what the assessment process is like, how quick it goes, what we're asking for. And I'll tell you, there's a lot of value just going through with experience. I've been through it myself through our own DIBCAC assessment, and then being on the side of joint surveillance voluntary assessments. When you go through it, it really helps, because now you understand the pace, the expectations, what it's like. So when you go back into it, you're a lot more ready. So there's a lot of value. Obviously, there's it's a business decision because there's extra costs to go through a mock assessment. But I was thinking about this last week, and someone made a comment on the webinar I was on, and it kind of made me think about it's almost like assessment. I can't really call it assessment insurance, if you will, but maybe assessment assurance. But if you go through a mock assessment, you're going to learn and be ready for your real assessment. And it gives you a chance to do it when there's no risk to not passing and having to do the full thing over again. Because if you go into an assessment and you can't meet the minimum threshold of the 88 out of 110 or the 80% score, you're going to have to start over and repay for the entire thing. That's not fun. So to avoid that, that's one option you have, is you can hire any C3PO that's authorized to do a mock assessment. And as long as we don't cross over that consulting line, then we could do the official assessment too.
And I know, Kelly, the line of demarcation you're talking about is that you can't give recommendations on how to fill the gaps, but you do. Yep. Do you, as part of that, do you give the POAM? So do you come up with okay, here's where you are, you scored a 90, right? And here's your POAM items. Do you go that far in your mock assessment?
Yeah, essentially we can tell you why you didn't pass or what you didn't pass and why you didn't pass it. In other words, we're explaining that you didn't have, I don't know, 2FA turned on. I'm kind of being silly about it, but something like that. We can tell you what it is. We just can't tell you how to fix it. We can't tell you or advise you on what to do to pass the assessment, but we can absolutely tell you what's wrong. And out of that, the spreadsheets basically that you get at the end, you'll be able to say and take that as a POAM and be able to say, okay, here's the 2 controls, 5 controls, 20 controls that they said we didn't pass because of XYZ. That just gives you almost like a punch list of, okay, here's the remaining things we got to knock out. We didn't have this one thing. We didn't have this thing signed. Or, some documentation said something different than our SSP, but the SSP is the gospel. So we had to get that, things like that.
So if you go through the if you go through the assessment and you score under an 88, right? So, which is the whole 88 or better, so then you have 188 days to rectify any POAM items. If you score under 88, what happens? Do they
You start over. You
start
literally
over
have to start all over, start new scheduling, yep. Start a whole new assessment. So if you can't meet that minimum threshold,
right? You're charging it. The C3PAO is charging 100% of that first assessment, and now you're paying for 2 assessments, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's important. But to be clear, that's if you go through a certified assessment and not the mock. The mock does not have that requirement.
Yeah. Right.
Oh, right. Yeah, that's what I was saying. The value of the mock. So the reason I'm asking is we don't have to do that because we have people like you, Chris, or Bob, that are assuring the customers that we work with that they're going to score 88 or above. So what Kelly's talking about from a mock assessment standpoint is that if you don't have that assurance from a consultant, then it would be prudent to look at that.
Right. I actually think it's prudent in any way. It's not a bad idea to schedule a mock just because it does buy you some extra time if you get some surprise. Or, we've seen and get concerned about and advise our clients, careful what you guys say during your interviews. You need to really think this through and sit down with your team, and we call it white glove service, but sit down with each person who's going to be interviewed to make sure we understand the answers they're going to be giving. Because if they differ from the policy, that's reason enough right there for an assessor to say, flag, I don't think you guys are going to pass. So these kinds of things that a mock assessment will give you a chance to walk through. If you're not doing a mock assessment with the team that's giving you the guidance, I'd highly recommend signing up for one with your C3PO like Kelly's firm.
Yeah, we're getting a couple questions in the chat, and one a little bit related to this that I think is pretty interesting, and I've fielded this before. And what documentation is needed to prove your processes for the C3PAO? And my response is, boy, that's an open-ended question because each control require different artifacts, but then some artifacts will relate to multiple controls. So maybe, you know, one of you three want to go ahead and take what you've seen and what you've done with clients so that they have a better idea of how to prepare the document.
I'll summarize, and I'm sure Chris will jump on this too. It's just essentially at the very, very fundamental level. You've got to have a policy, or policies, it should be. You've got to have your policies. You've got to have your plan, which is your SSP. You may have sub plans and other plans and whatnot, but essentially you've got to have your policies, your SSP, and then your SOPs, as we call them, you know, from all of our former military people, but you know, your standard operating procedures, your documentation of how you do things. That's really critical to have those documented step by step. If we do this, this is how we do it. So that kind of documentation is really critical. You know, that's the core of a documentation package. There's a lot more things like forms, things like reports, and then obviously your normal typical artifacts of screenshots and whatever. But the basic documentation is what I explained.
Oh, also make sure when you create documentation artifacts, like you're getting password controls or something like that, you get the date and timestamp in the screen print. Remember, that's down in your bottom right hand corner. Make sure you have that. That way it proves when you got it. And the other thing, note who took the screenshot so that they know who did it and the time they did it.
Now the
Yeah,
assessor.
so I'm gonna,
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'd like,
Yeah, I'm sorry. After you
sorry, go ahead, Chris. Well, I was just going to throw something out there from because I know the answer to this, but I'd like to hear you guys chime in. Can I just, if I'm ready to get assessed, can I just go to any C3PAO and it's all pretty much going to be the same?
Everybody laughs, right?
Yes.
I would say here's the thing to remember.
I mean, what, there's 50, 60 of them out there, right? So do I just go to the one that can get me in there the quickest and just move forward?
CMMC is new to everybody, and we don't all think the same way right now. There are assessors that I think are more paying attention and joining all the meetings that they can to share and listen to how other assessors are viewing things. That's who you need to be involved with. Those that are out there doing their own thing. Part of our services when we prepare people is to help them find a C3PAO, because you want to find a C3PAO that's going to have a predictable approach. They've been in the meetings, they're listening, they're collaborating. Oh, so that's how people are thinking about XYZ control. We even have internal debates on our team about some of the controls. You think that's enough evidence for that? I don't think it is. Those kinds of things. You need to be in front of a C3PAO that is having those kinds of conversations.
Yeah. Yep. And Chris and I do too.
That's right.
We go, you know, all of us here, we go back and forth on it because the other thing with that is the vertical. If you feel that you're in a, let's say, an odd type vertical, I think also as a C3PAO, oh, do you do aviation? Do you do, you know, if you're creating software? I would also ask about that too, because if you're in a specialized vertical, having the C3PAO understand your vertical, I think will help too.
100%.
Yeah, and I want to echo what Chris was saying about the experienced C3PO, so to speak, or the experienced assessors. I really should put it out there, because in the C3PO space, just to give you guys some of the back end side of it, there's a group of us called the C3PO Stakeholders Forum, which is the vast majority of the candidate C3POs and authorized C3POs. We talk every Thursday morning, 9:00 a.m., and we've been doing it for, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And we literally have these discussions about every single possible thing related to the assessments, the assessment process, and those that have been taking part in that, and those that are participating every Friday, the authorized C3POs have a call as well with the Cyber AB. Those groups, I mean, we've been doing it for so long, and we just talk this stuff over and over and over, and actually find it interesting, go figure, but some people find it really boring maybe. But it's been really good. There are new assessors, and a lot of us have concerns about this. Someone just got their CCA, and they haven't been having these discussions for that long time. They may not have that background, but they can meet the qualifications. If they're on an assessment team and they're the lead CCA, but they haven't really done any that, that does make me a little concerned as the owner of a C3PO. But I know the people that I'm hiring, and I know the people that we're bringing in as assessors. I know them because I've been talking to them for years. We've partnered, these are good people. So yeah, just I'd share that point too.
Yeah,
I wanted to
fantastic.
go back to an earlier topic real quick. We talked about documentation. Clearly having policies in place. One of the other documents that assessors are going to want to see, and I'm sure some of the other assessors here will weigh in on that too, is your POAM. And that's something that a lot of companies don't have. If they have not been guided through the process, the POAM stands for Plan of Action and Milestones. I want to see your POAM if I'm an assessor because I understand your journey. And you also need to build into your company the idea that POAMs are now forever and ever. Even if you check off all the things that CMMC requires on your POAM, and you should before your assessment, you're going to want to have an operational POAM where you're just trying to get better every day. Hey, we got some technology that maybe it's outdated now, and we'd like to update it to what's more cyber secure. That kind of POAM that's continually being reviewed every few months is what you need to build into your culture at the company. And so if you don't have a POAM right now, you need to align with somebody that can help you through that process to understand why it's so critical to assessors and why it's critical to just ongoing cybersecurity status, your posture.
Yeah, and that's a really important point about the POAM. The POAM is not a bad thing. There's been a lot of misinformation over the years about, especially in the earlier days of CMMC version 1, where, if you have a POAM, you can't have POAMs. No POAMs. Think of the POAM as a log. The POAM's not a snapshot. It's not a one-time thing. Think of it as a log of the things you have fixed and the things you have addressed. And that's a good thing. That's a good artifact to bring into your assessment of showing this is us tracking. This is us showing that we did these things. We've accomplished them. We've knocked them out. It's a log of it. Think of it from that perspective, and I think that helps too.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about the relationship between the POAM and the SSP? Is that a direct relationship, or is that these two separate documents, but they're both key for anyone who's going through this journey?
We treat them as separate documents, but they should be structured. POAM should be structured, especially for getting ready for your assessment, underneath the same structure as the SSP, which is broken down by control and objective. So the POAMs, if you're working with somebody who knows what they're doing and preparing you, and be careful, there are a lot out there who claim to be helpful with CMMC because they see big dollars right now. Ask them what their training is and their certification level. Because if they're not going through on an objective by objective basis, there are 320 objectives for a level 2 assessment. If they're not breaking it down that granularly, you probably aren't getting the best advice. And your POAM likewise should be going into the details in that extent.
Well, Robert, you were about to say something.
Yeah, there's another question in here, and they're asking about coverage about CMMC Level 1. And maybe I know that's one thing over the past week I've been talking about, because let me frame it a little bit from the discussions I've gotten from the contractors. One, we're level 1 right now, but we think we're going to be level 2. And because we know the time frame it takes to become level 2, I think if they approach level 1 more than just doing a self-assessment, if their contracts end up coming with level 2, it won't be as hard or long of a path. So I know, Chris, Steve, and I were talking about that this week. I don't know if one of you two want to pick up on that.
Yeah, I would add that I would not think of this as just trying to hit a certain goal. Okay, I only need to do what the 17 requirements are for level 1, 15, depending on which source you're pointing to. Your company and the safety of our warriors is at stake here. And so this should be, don't stop at level 1. It should be, let's continue to work on this. Let's be able to, if it were a need, to be level 2 certified, because frankly, you're in a better secure posture. We have seen, and I'm a part of a cybersecurity group out here where I'm in the DC area, where we get together and talk, and it's off the record. It's called Chatham House Rules. You don't say who you got the information from, but you can talk about some of the things they're seeing. We're seeing some really scary stuff, guys. We saw a casino get hacked by them coming in through the heater in the fish tank. They had a huge fish tank. They put a Internet of Things heater that they can control. Literally, they got into their system and locked down their system and demanded millions in ransom through the aquarium. It's amazing what our adversaries will do and how far they can go. And you guys don't sit still. Cybersecurity does not sit still.
Right.
Yeah, and I can just say quickly is that you're inheriting not a level 2 from Lifeline, but a little level 3, because we're at a DISA IL5 level with the Navy. So you're getting a SIM and a 24/7 SOC, whether you need it or not, right? Those are all baked into our solution. So our shared responsibility matrix, you're inheriting in a level 3, even though you only need a level 1 initially. You're certainly starting with the end in mind if you are looking at going to level 2. And a lot of companies they're thinking they're level 1, they're FCI, but they bleed into CUI at a future contract, or maybe even the current contract that they didn't even realize.
Yeah, because you got to understand that the contract writers for DoD are going through training, where before they weren't maybe as astute in including the CUI verbiage into the contracts. I think you're going to see a little bit of change this year to where maybe your contract maybe was borderline, you didn't worry about it, and all of a sudden the revision comes up, or you have an addendum. That's the other thing. You get an addendum, you have to look at that. All of a sudden you come back and scope with the addendum. All of a sudden you see, this is now CUI. What do I do? And that's why prep yourself. I think that's the best thing to do.
Let me add something to that real quick, Bob.
Sure. Yep.
And I think it's a critical point. The new rule, as much as people would like to point to, hey, it's got 4 years of implementation before it gets fully rolled out. It gave a huge carve out. It said, hey, if the procurement officer says, I think my project is level 2 or level 3, they can determine that on their own time frame. They don't have to follow that 4-year timeline at all. And put yourself in the procurement officer's shoes. How many of them are going to say, I'm not really worried about this project. It's not an important project. I'm going to put this, on the least strenuous time schedule for people implementing. I don't see that. And we've already seen the Army come out last month and say, anybody who's building on the IDIQ, it's going to be, you must be certified or have an assessment scheduled, and we want proof of that, or don't even bid. And the Army didn't need to do that. They just said, no, we're going 100%.
Right. Right. And there goes that 4-year span, right? Out the window. Yep. Exactly.
Well, even Title 48, everybody thinks, we're waiting for Title 48. It's not going to start showing up in contracts, but it is. It is.
It's already there. Yep.
Yeah. Next question. How do I become a CQAP, and do any of you have one on staff? And I think this is going to go over to Kelly.
Okay, so this is interesting. So the quality assurance role, it's a CCA. I mean, they've got an abbreviation for it, but we just call it QA role. But all it is you have to be a CCA and you're on the assessment team. Us as a C3 Pro, we're designating who on the team is going to be which role. A lead CCA, a unleaded CCA. Yeah, I just made that up. I've been calling it regular CCA, but called unleaded CCA. Then the QA CCA. That's the core of a team that we have to have. So to become that, to kind of say, how do I become that QA role? I can't really answer that because there's not a direct path to the QA role. There's a direct path to becoming a CCA, and then the people that are going to be doing the QA are more likely than not, like for us, I'm going to be doing the QA role primarily, hopefully. I don't have the time to do all the assessments as well. I've got to run a company, but I'll do some of the QA roles. As we field more teams, I'll have other QAs that I know. I think it would be harder to try to get to the QA role because that's a very, very critical role, but it's also less hours. So if you're looking for something like part-time, okay. But if you're looking to get really involved as an assessor, I'd say go the standard assessor route, get some experience and get the credentials in there. The QA is kind of a higher level because there's a lot of responsibility of making sure everything is right and everything's perfect before we send it off to the DoD and the CMMC EMAS.
So it's good. One of the things that just about all of the small businesses are going to be interested in is cost. And I know that is all dependent upon the work that you're doing. And I'm going to put you all on the spot right now and ask you to give a range and maybe some caveats as to for costing purposes.
It got a little more expensive recently because the new rule did two significant things that directly impacted assessments. One is they said 3 assessors on every assessment team, 2 plus a QA assessor, the guy that Kelly was just talking about, guy or girl. We have women on our team too. Second thing is they said, guess what, assessors, you need to go out and get these certifications to be an assessor or a lead assessor. And the lead assessor is even more certifications. So what does that mean? All of us had to go back, and if we didn't already have certifications, go and get more certifications to prove our value and, of course, spend money for those. That has prompted a lot of people to say, well, our assessments just went up in price. And they necessarily are going up in price because you have another assessor on the team. But I also think of it as a good thing, and I'm sorry, Deb, that you're going to have to pay a little bit more. You're going to have 3 sets of eyes of the most highly trained people in this whole ecosystem. So you're going to get a better assessment. You're going to get a more quality assessment, and you're not going to get as many mistakes because of that. But they did get a little bit more expensive. The prices I've heard, and Kelly, I'd love for you to weigh in too. Assessments are starting at 45-ish and going up from there, depending on complexity, size, how many places you have to visit. What have you seen, Kelly?
Yeah, what I'll tell you is pretty much what we tell any prospect that we get on the phone with is, first of all, ask a C3PO how they base their pricing. And I don't know how many of them are doing it the way we are, but I would imagine probably most are. We're doing it not based on the organization size, number of people, endpoints. That's not really what matters to us. What matters to us is what's the actual assessment scope size. So are we talking a small assessment scope, medium assessment scope, large assessment scope? That's the way we're building our pricing. We think the majority of what we're going to see and what we're going to do is in that the small assessment scope, which is small enclave, small business, small enterprise, 150 employee manufacturer, enterprise scope. Things are in that kind of the typical that we're going to see. That's what we consider the small assessment scope. And right now, those are ranging, not just what we're quoting, but what I've heard from people who have gotten quotes out there from, so to speak, our competitors. Those are running anywhere in the 40 to 55,000 range. If you're looking at that little bit larger, the medium scope, then they're in the maybe 55 to 75. If you're in a large scope, which I have not even had one come to us, Lockheed Martin's not beating the door down at our house saying, hey, come and assess us. But if they did, those are in the 75,000 to 100,000, and I'll say 100,000 plus. Not that I've quoted. I cannot come up with a quote over 100,000, but I have heard that there are many and plenty out there that have been quoted higher than 100,000. I can't get there. So the majority of what we're dealing with is that small assessment scope in that 40 to 55 range. And I can say that based on, I don't know, we've put out probably about 50 proposals over the last month or so with fixed cost. We're quoting a firm fixed cost. Pretty much nobody that I know of is doing time and materials. It's a fixed cost. Now, as far as the locations and travel, that's a really key point. So we're doing a fixed cost on the travel based on how many locations we know we have to go to. And fortunately, the sampling I mentioned earlier came out, so that's helping with that. So yeah, that's just to give you a ballpark idea of some of the ranges that are out there and what we're officially quoting.
One add on to that, if you could talk about what can the organizations seeking certification do to lower that cost, to defray that cost? What can they do internally to reduce that?
I think the more you can do to shrink your assessment scope, at least from our perspective, that helps get you down into that small assessment scope size. So if you're doing a enclave approach and it's a small, it's a typical enclave approach, that's going to be it. If you're trying to do your full enterprise, an enterprise scope is very difficult, but if you're trying to do a full enterprise and you've got, I don't know, 500 employees and 500 endpoints, and you're trying to do an enterprise scope, that's a lot harder because you're saying everything's in scope, everyone's in scope, every facility's in scope. So the enclave approach helps scale that down if you can do it. You can enclave your systems, you can enclave your people, and you can enclave your facility, so to speak, because each one of those is a different part of your assessment scope. So that's really the best advice I can give. The price itself, just to give you guys a background on calculating the cost, it's no secret sauce. It's a very simple equation of how we build the cost. It's, first of all, how many assessors do I have to have? Which Chris mentioned that baseline is the 3 assessors. How many assessors do I have to have? How many man hours have I estimated that these assessments will take and what the hourly rate is? And that's your equation. It's very, very simple. Even though I have a crazy spreadsheet that I built for it, essentially that's the equation that's behind it. So that's why the cost is driven. One, that team having an extra person required, that really bumped up the low end of the scale. So lowering the cost, the biggest thing is lower your scope and have your ducks in a row.
I want to add one more thing too. When you're looking at your scope and how to make it easier on the assessors, consider a solution like what Steve's company, Lifeline, provides, which is, can we do VDI and really not worry about the devices themselves? If you lock down the environment with a VDI solution, that is becoming so much easier to deploy. And in many cases, we're recommending that because now you don't have to worry about, well, we have bring our own devices, or, hey, he's on an iPad instead of a computer, and what do I do there? Well, if you create a VDI solution in general, you've made your assessment scope much easier and compliant with, in some cases, a turnkey solution.
Hey, what about one thing, and Philip, I know you guys have a GRC tool, correct? At USGovCert. So what, Kelly and Chris and whoever, what about the way things are organized and the ease of which you can get in to see what you need to see? Does a GRC tool assist in perhaps reducing time, effort, costs?
Incredibly.
Yeah. On both sides. DOC perspective, yes, it could definitely make your life easier. On the assessor side, it makes our life easier because we know it's going to be well organized. You give us access to it, you're controlling it, so you're still controlling all your own information. So yeah, I think there's a lot of advantages to a good GRC.
Think of it as your audience is the assessor, and they have to find 320 different controls or objectives that you're doing. The easiest you can make their job, the more it's going to benefit you. So if you can literally point out, and this is what the GRC tools should be doing, if you can literally point out, okay, here's 3115B and where I'm doing it and where you can find evidence of that, you've just saved my day. I mean, I'm like, oh, this is going to be so much easier. Then I have to dig through policy after policy to figure out where this was accomplished. You mapped it for me. That's what a good GRC tool does.
It's fantastic. This is fantastic. I just want to remind the audience, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. The contact information for all of the participants and the slide deck will be made available to you, and feel confident that reaching out to any of these experts will be beneficial for you. They have tons and tons of real life experience that predates CMMC. They were, I know Robert has been around for ever since Adam was a lad. So he's been around for a long time. So he's got lots of experience at this.
Right.
Not only the newer stuff, but he can really relate to how
Mainframe. Go
things
back to
has been done.
mainframes.
The A-frame
Yeah.
technology period.
There's an
Um,
interesting question that came in, Philip, and this is something we haven't touched on, and we don't get a lot on, but it's about OT assets and being in scope. And what happens if you have OT assets, but you feel that they really aren't part of what you're doing with CMMC? Would they still be in scope because of being connected to the network?
that I'm going to defer to um, someone else on the panel. I know, Steve, you work a little, you might have some insight there.
What was that again, Bob? Can you
They
say it
have
one more time?
OT, yeah, OT assets. And again, I'm kind of putting it out for you guys to answer, but if they're physically and logically isolated from your CMMC business, are they then declared out of scope? And I thought
OT, what is
maybe,
OT?
operational
Okay.
technology. So like, you have your CNC machines, different things. You
Oh,
could
right.
have
Okay. Yeah.
different
Well, you
readers
know
and
the answer to
everything
that,
out.
right?
I do, but I wanted you guys to answer on it.
Yeah. You could probably answer better than anyone.
Yeah. What, one, is it, did you subnet it and everything? Is it truly, logically and physically separated with it?
Yeah, because I
And
mean, from our perspective, and you know this, Bob, you can't virtualize everything. So
right,
there's some things that are just going to remain in scope, right? And then you're going to have to mitigate the risks in those areas. You have to do what you need to do to protect and segment off those areas just to have the least
right.
impact as possible from a scoping perspective, right?
Well, and the other thing, so you go to a VDI and the endpoints are out of scope then. And so then if you're going into an area that ends up maybe having OT, maybe, and it's logically but not physically separated, but you're on an endpoint that's out of scope, you're good. So I don't know if Kelly, you want to add a little bit to maybe something that you may have seen within it. Probably this is probably a little bit more on manufacturing. I see a lot of that.
Mhm. Well, I want to actually share something that came up yesterday in
Sure.
the webinar that I was running, that you mentioned out of scope, and it just triggered something from yesterday that I want to share, not as a sidetrack, because it kind of ties into this though, is just remember, out of scope does not mean out of the assessment, and that not applicable does not mean not askable. Okay, I made that term up yesterday, but so if it's out of scope, you still have to document it. You still have to have it in your diagram. You have to show what assets are out of scope so that we as assessors can understand that they're out of scope and why you're saying they're out of scope. Out of scope doesn't mean hidden and not involved. And then on the not applicable side, if you say not applicable, it doesn't mean, oh, they said not applicable, move on to the next thing. You have to justify and explain why it's not applicable. I always think of the one that says, do you do software development essentially? And people say not applicable. Yes, we don't do software development. But if you have one that you're saying not applicable to, you've got to explain and justify why it's not applicable. So I thought I'd share that because that came up yesterday. It was a helpful thing.
And here's the other thing, that this has been a moving target. And so it's a great question, because this technology, operational technology, has not been treated the same throughout the CMMC process. And I date back to writing the books way back when it was CMMC 1.0. And we've had to update a lot of stuff. The final rule clearly categorized OT, operational technology, as a specialized asset. And it also says, here's what the assessor is to do with specialized assets. You review the SSP to make sure, just like what Kelly said, that you've talked about this operational technology, but it specifically says you do not assess against any other CMMC security requirements. That's in the new rule. So they're not going to go in there and say, let me see how this is connected to XYZ. What kind of security do you have set up for your OT? Not needed anymore. And it was before. All they want to all an assessor needs to see is that, hey, the SSP talks about it and sets it up as part of their network or part of their system and way they do business, but that's it. That's all I need to see.
We have a few more minutes here, and I want to get some questions in, or at least the ability to discuss a couple of major things. We talked about costs, at least give a kind of a ballpark figure or ballpark for where you could consider costs. We talk about some things that the community can do to prepare for an audit. We
what we didn't talk about, Philip, is we didn't touch on the process itself.
Okay.
Okay. I mean, Kelly, when you go in to do an assessment, what are we looking at? Weeks, months, years?
For scheduling, it's about 6 years. No. So for scheduling right now, we're doing things a little bit differently. So if you came to us right now, you could actually get assessed next month if you could really get your ducks, or start the assessment next month, I should say, because the assessment itself is about a 6 to 7 week process, with really the last 2 weeks being the core part of the assessment. But as far as scheduling, the sooner you get a hold of us or any authorized C3PO, the better, because it takes a little bit of time to go through the price quoting, back and forth, contractual agreement, reviewing, and all that stuff. So there's a decent amount of admin time. Then scheduling is going to be at least 6 to 7 weeks out, because you need that long to really start the assessment. So, the sooner the better. And the way things are building up and piling up, I mean, literally every day I can't say every day, but almost every day we've got another company we're scheduling. And so we're going fast. I know every other CPO is getting booked up. So I don't see that as a false sales pressure technique. I promise you, I'm saying that legitimately. Is there's not very many of us. There's even less right now because of the reauthorization process we all had to go through right before the rules finalized. So literally, the sooner the better you get engaged. But you can get an assessment in the month you want right now if you get in the queue quickly.
And then when you kick off an assessment, let's say you start on a Monday, right? It's a linear thing where you start it, you end it, you don't go away, come back, go away, come back. Or how long does it take once you kick it off?
So basically, 6 to 7 week process. We start out, the very beginning is a readiness assessment, which is, we have a kickoff meeting. We do a readiness assessment where it's a go or no go decision, saying, yay, we think you're ready to make it for the assessment. You got your ducks in a row. We spot check some stuff. We read the SSP, but we're not evaluating the SSP for adequacy and sufficiency. We're just trying to do the check to make sure we believe you're ready to be assessed. Then at I said 6 or 7 weeks. So the last 2 weeks of that process, then you have your documentation review week, and then you have your interview week. After that, it's just us building out the report. After that interview week, doing the administrative stuff we have to do to get the information together to upload into EMAS, and then finalize the certification for a client, assuming that you passed.
Okay, there's a couple questions. One person wanted to know, can you explain all the jargon terms? And I think going up to the CMMC cyberab.org, go up there, they have some resources that will help explain all that. And one, Chris, does XQ message vault qualify as BDI?
XQ message qualify as BDI?
Or at least take some endpoints out of scope.
It does. So you definitely can eliminate endpoints with XQ. And in fact, this applies even more so in the ITAR space. ITAR very clearly says if it's encrypted, as it is with XQ, then it no longer has to have the same kind of limitations on the access.
Good. Okay.
So a basic question, if I am looking for a vendor or a MSP, and I know this is a field where there are lots of new entrants, lots of people purporting to have expertise in this area. how do you, as a small business, go about evaluating consultants, evaluating business partners? If I've got a contract and I'm trying to verify whether or not a potential partner or a subcontractor is qualified or have all the certificates lined up, what are some basic steps for identifying a consultant or a MSP in terms of qualifications? How do you separate the wheat from the chaff?
Any external service provider like a MSP better understand what a shared responsibility matrix is. The new rule calls it a customer responsibility matrix. If they don't know that, they're not going to help you. In fact, it's going to hurt you. The assessors will need to see that shared responsibility matrix. And if they don't have one, they don't understand what this space requires, run away. So that's for any external service provider like an MSP. But name the provider. You've got to have a shared responsibility matrix. So that's one big one. For consultants, just make sure they've got a solid training through the Cyber AB. The DoD has locked this down. They said you've got to use our materials, you've got to use our instructors, you've got to go through this certification process that looks exactly like this. But because they've done that, they get consistency. So find out what certifications they have.
Yeah, I think one big thing, and I hear this a lot, what we got a quote from someone that's 10, 15, 20 grand. They say they're going to come in and do an assessment, right? Which is not the same as what Kelly does, but to do something, right? And what are the deliverables and what is left? So, when we give somebody a price, it's a turnkey solution. We tell them what it's going to take to get to compliance, and then we get them all the way to the point where they're audit ready. So that's what I ask them is, okay, once I get through this $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 project, what do I have left? Right. And that's just ask them.
Okay. And I know we're coming up on the time right now. So any final thoughts before we end?
Just make sure you get qualified people, that they've done it before, they have a good background on it. Like I think Chris said, there's a lot of people out there for the money on it, and you want to make sure vet the people.
And obviously, we had so many good questions. We ran over time again. Reach out to us individually. Reach out to Philip, and he can put you in touch with a group that can answer your questions. And hopefully, we'll see you at another one.
Again, thanks very much, guys. This has been fantastic. I think we're getting better at this. Again, the slide deck will be sent to everyone that registered. The contact information for Kelly, Chris, Robert, Steve will also be available. And this webinar will be on YouTube shortly. You could also find some other resources, some past webinars that this same team has provided. And again, thank you all for taking the time today. And I look forward to our next webinar session, perhaps in a couple of weeks. Again, thank you very much, and you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.